Josiah Carter wiped the grease from his hands and looked up at the Montana sky. The stars were coming out now that the sun had set behind the mountains. He had been fixing cars all day at his small garage, but his mind was not on engines or transmissions. His mind was up there among those distant points of light. At 28 years old, Josiah had spent every clear night of his life staring at the stars. Other people in his small town thought he was strange. They said he should focus on real things like making money or finding a wife. But Josiah knew something they did not understand. Those stars were calling to him. The alien ships had first appeared over Earth when Josiah was just 12 years old. The whole world had panicked at first, but the aliens came in peace. They called themselves the Galactic Federation, and they said humans were welcome to join them as a minor species. Minor species, they explained, were like children in the galactic community. They could trade and learn, but they were not allowed to explore space or make important decisions. Most humans accepted this arrangement. The aliens brought new technology and medicine. Earth became safer and more comfortable. But Josiah never stopped dreaming of something more. He wanted to fly among those stars, to see what was out there beyond Earth's atmosphere. His sister, Katie, thought he was wasting his life. She worked at the bank in town and had a nice house and a husband who sold insurance. She was happy with her quiet life, but she worried about Josiah. He lived alone above his garage and spent all his free time reading about space travel and alien technology. Katie knocked on his garage door as he was closing up for the night. She had brought him dinner again, a plate of fried chicken and mashed potatoes wrapped in aluminum foil. She did this twice a week because she was sure he was not eating properly. "You missed dinner at Mom and Dad's house again," Katie said as she handed him the plate. Their parents lived on a farm outside town where they had grown up. Every Sunday the family gathered for dinner, but Josiah often forgot to come. "I was busy," Josiah said, though they both knew he had been reading alien technical manuals that he ordered online. He collected everything he could find about alien technology, even though most of it was far beyond human understanding. Katie sighed and looked around the garage. Josiah had cleared out half the space and filled it with strange equipment he had built himself. He called it his training center, but Katie thought it looked like a pile of junk. There were metal bars hanging from the ceiling, spinning wheels that made him dizzy, and a chair that could flip upside down. "What is all this stuff for, Josiah?" Katie asked, even though she had asked the same question many times before. "Training," Josiah said simply. He had explained it before, but Katie never seemed to understand. He was preparing himself for the day when humans would be allowed to explore space. He knew that day would come eventually, and he wanted to be ready. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The television in the diner where Josiah ate breakfast was showing a special report. An alien ship had landed at the United Nations building in New York. The ship belonged to the Corvani Empire, which was different from the Galactic Federation. The Corvani were explorers, the best space travelers in the galaxy. The Corvani ambassador stood at a podium and spoke in perfect English. His voice was deep and calm, and his blue skin seemed to glow under the bright lights. He announced that the Corvani Empire was holding a tournament to select new members for their exploration corps. Any species in the galaxy could send candidates to compete. Josiah nearly choked on his coffee. This was exactly what he had been waiting for his entire life. The other people in the diner were talking and laughing about it. They thought it was funny that aliens would even mention humans as possible candidates. Everyone knew humans were too weak and stupid to compete with advanced alien species. But Josiah was not laughing. He was thinking about all those nights he had spent training in his garage, all those hours he had spent studying alien technology. He had been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. The Corvani ambassador continued speaking on television. The tournament would begin in 6 months. Candidates would be tested on physical abilities, mental skills, and their capacity to work with alien technology. The winners would join the most elite group of explorers in the galaxy. Billy Hayes, who owned the farm supply store, slapped Josiah on the back and laughed. "Hey Josiah, maybe you should enter this alien contest. You already act like you are from another planet." Everyone in the diner laughed at Billy's joke, but Josiah did not laugh. He was already planning how he would get to the registration center. He was already thinking about what he would need to do to prepare for the tests. That afternoon, Josiah called the number that appeared on the news broadcast. A human secretary answered and told him that registration was open to any human citizen, over 18 years old. There was no fee to enter, but candidates had to get to the testing facility in Nevada on their own. Josiah had been saving money for years without really knowing why. He had enough to travel to Nevada and stay there for as long as the tests lasted. He had a passport because he had always dreamed of traveling, even though he had never left Montana. Katie came to the garage that evening and found Josiah taking apart his training equipment. He was packing some pieces into boxes and selling others to raise more money for his trip. "You are not seriously thinking about entering this alien contest," Katie said. Her voice was worried and angry at the same time. "I am not thinking about it," Josiah replied as he carefully wrapped a gyroscope he had built. "I am doing it." Katie sat down on a wooden crate and watched her brother work. She had always known this day would come. Josiah had been preparing for something like this his whole life. She was scared for him, but she also knew there was no point in trying to change his mind. Once Josiah decided to do something, nothing could stop him. "What if you get hurt?" Katie asked. "What if these aliens are dangerous?" Josiah stopped packing and looked at his sister. "What if I do not try? What if I spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been?" Katie could not argue with that logic. She had always played it safe, always chosen the easy path. But Josiah was different. He was willing to risk everything for his dreams, even when everyone else thought those dreams were impossible. Outside the garage, the stars were shining down on the small Montana town, just as they had every night for thousands of years. But tonight felt different. Tonight those stars seemed closer, as if they were waiting for someone brave enough to reach for them. Word spread quickly through the small Montana town that Josiah Carter was planning to enter the alien tournament. Some people thought it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Others thought Josiah had finally lost his mind completely. But a few people began to take him seriously. Frank Morrison was one of those people. Frank had been a pilot in the Air Force for 30 years before he retired to Montana. He had flown fighter jets and cargo planes all over the world. When he heard about Josiah's plan, he walked into the garage on a Tuesday morning while Josiah was working on Mrs. Peterson's old pickup truck. "I hear you are going to compete with aliens," Frank said without any introduction. He was a direct man who never wasted words. Josiah looked up from under the hood of the truck. He had motor oil on his face and his hands were black with grease. "That is right," he said simply. Frank walked around the garage looking at the training equipment that Josiah had not yet packed away. He tested the strength of the hanging bars and examined the spinning chair that Josiah used to build up his tolerance for motion sickness. "This equipment is not bad," Frank said after a few minutes, "but it is not enough. If you are serious about this, you need real training." Frank had heard about the Corvani tournament requirements from the news reports. The tests would include zero-gravity simulation, high-speed maneuvering, and complex problem-solving under stress. These were things that military pilots trained for their entire careers. "I can help you," Frank offered, "but only if you are completely serious about this. I do not have time to waste on someone who is just playing around." Josiah put down his wrench and looked Frank in the eye. "I have been serious about this my whole life. I just did not know what I was being serious about until now." Frank nodded. He had seen that look before in young pilots who had what it took to succeed. Most people who talked about being pilots never made it through the first week of training. But some people had something special inside them, something that would not let them quit no matter how hard things became. Lisa Grant was another person who started taking Josiah seriously. Lisa had been his best friend since they were children. She worked as a mechanic at the Ford dealership in the next town over. She was one of the best mechanics in the state, even though she was only 26 years old. Lisa came to see Josiah on Wednesday evening. She found him in his garage working with Frank on a new training routine. Frank had brought some equipment from his old Air Force days, including a device that could simulate the feeling of high gravity forces. "Are you crazy?" Lisa asked Josiah directly. She had never been one to dance around difficult subjects. Do you have any idea what you're trying to do? These aliens have technology that is thousands of years ahead of us. They can travel between stars like we drive to the grocery store. Josiah stopped exercising and sat down on a bench. He was breathing hard from the training routine that Frank had designed for him. I know exactly what I am trying to do, he said. I am trying to prove that humans deserve better than being called a minor species. Lisa sat down next to him. She had known Josiah long enough to understand how his mind worked. He did not see obstacles the same way other people did. Where most people saw impossibility, Josiah saw a challenge that just required the right approach. What makes you think you can succeed where every other human would fail? Lisa asked. Josiah was quiet for a moment. He was not good with words, and he had trouble explaining the feeling he had inside. Do you remember when we were kids and everyone said I would never be able to fix cars because I did not go to school for it? Lisa remembered. Josiah had learned to be a mechanic by taking apart every broken machine he could find. He had taught himself by experimenting and making mistakes. Most people thought he would never amount to anything because he did not follow the normal path. You proved them wrong, Lisa admitted. Josiah was now one of the best mechanics in the region, even though he had never taken a formal class. This is the same thing, Josiah said. Everyone thinks humans need fancy education and advanced technology to compete with aliens. But maybe we just need to be human. Frank overheard this conversation and nodded approvingly. In his military experience, the pilots who succeeded were not always the ones with the highest test scores or the most advanced equipment. The ones who succeeded were the ones who could adapt and improvise when everything went wrong. Billy Hayes continued to make fun of Josiah whenever he saw him in town. Billy enjoyed having something to laugh about, and Josiah's alien tournament plan was the most entertaining thing that had happened in their small town for years. Hey, space boy, Billy called out when he saw Josiah at the gas station. Have you started growing extra arms yet? I hear that is what aliens like. Billy's friends laughed, but Josiah ignored them. He had heard worse jokes about his dreams before. He was used to people not understanding what drove him to reach for something beyond their small town. But not everyone was laughing. Mrs. Henderson, who taught at the elementary school, stopped Josiah outside the post office on Friday afternoon. She was an elderly woman who had taught 3 generations of local children. I think what you are doing is brave, she told Josiah quietly. When I was young, people said women could not be teachers. They said we were not smart enough. But I became a teacher anyway, and I was good at it. Mrs. Henderson patted Josiah's arm gently. Sometimes someone has to be the first to prove that everyone else is wrong. Maybe it is your turn to be that someone. Josiah was surprised by her support. Mrs. Henderson had always been kind to him, but he had not expected her to understand his dream of competing with aliens. As the days passed, more people began to pay attention to Josiah's training. Some came to watch out of curiosity. Others came to offer help or encouragement. A few came to try to talk him out of what they saw as a dangerous mistake. Katie visited the garage every day, bringing food and worrying about her brother. She could see that Josiah was getting stronger and more focused as he trained with Frank, but she could also see the enormous challenge he was facing. The news says that over 10,000 species will be sending candidates to this tournament, Katie told him one evening. That means millions of competitors. And you think one human from Montana can win? Josiah looked at his sister with calm confidence. I do not need to beat millions of competitors. I just need to be good enough to earn a place among the explorers. And I think humans have something that these aliens do not expect. What is that? Katie asked. Josiah smiled for the first time in weeks. We do not know when to quit. Outside the garage, the Montana sky was clear and full of stars. Somewhere among those stars, alien species were preparing their best candidates for the tournament. They had advanced technology, superior physical abilities, and thousands of years of experience in space travel. But they did not have what Josiah, Carter had. They did not have the stubborn determination of someone who had spent his entire life dreaming of the impossible and refusing to accept that it could not be done. The testing facility in Nevada was unlike anything Josiah had ever seen. The complex stretched for miles across the desert, with gleaming silver buildings that seemed to rise from the sand like alien structures themselves. Thousands of humans had come from all over the world to compete for the chance to represent Earth in the Corvani tournament. Josiah arrived on a hot Tuesday morning in an old pickup truck that he had driven straight from Montana. The truck looked out of place among the expensive cars and chartered buses that other candidates had used to reach the facility. But Josiah did not care about appearances. He had come here to prove himself, not to impress anyone. The registration process took most of the first day. Josiah stood in line with people who looked much more qualified than he did. There were former astronauts, military officers, scientists with advanced degrees, and athletes who had trained their entire lives for physical competitions. Most of them looked at Josiah and saw a simple mechanic from a small town who had no business being there. Dr. Paul Richards stood behind Josiah in the registration line. Paul had worked for NASA for 15 years and had helped design some of the most advanced spacecraft ever built by humans. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and thick glasses that made him look very intelligent. First time dealing with alien technology? Paul asked Josiah in a friendly voice. Yes, Josiah replied honestly. He had studied everything he could find about alien technology, but he had never actually touched any of it. Paul smiled in a way that was meant to be encouraging, but came across as condescending. Well, do not worry too much about it. These tests are designed for people with extensive technical backgrounds. Most of us will probably be eliminated in the first round anyway. Josiah did not respond to this comment. He had learned long ago that there was no point in arguing with people who had already decided what was possible and what was not. Rebecca Stone was another candidate who caught Josiah's attention. She was a former Navy SEAL who moved with the smooth confidence of someone who had been in dangerous situations before. Rebecca was shorter than most of the men around her, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made it clear she was not someone to underestimate. Rebecca noticed Josiah because he was one of the few candidates who did not seem nervous or excited. While others were talking loudly about their qualifications and strategies, Josiah quietly observed everything around him. She had learned in the military that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. The first test began on Wednesday morning. All candidates were brought into a massive hangar where alien technology had been set up for the trials. The equipment looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. It was made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light, and the controls consisted of symbols and shapes that hurt to look at directly. A Corvani official named Vex addressed the assembled humans. Vex was tall and blue-skinned like all of his species, but he wore the uniform of someone with high authority. His voice carried clearly through the hangar without any electronic amplification. "You will be tested on your ability to operate our technology under stress," Vex announced. "These tests are designed for species with natural abilities that humans do not possess. We do not expect any of you to pass, but the Galactic Federation requires that we give every species an equal opportunity." The first challenge involved navigating a spacecraft through a simulated asteroid field. The spacecraft was controlled by touching glowing symbols on a panel that changed configuration every few seconds. Most candidates could not even figure out how to make the ship move forward. Josiah watched the first few attempts carefully. He noticed that the symbols were not random. They followed a pattern based on the ship's position and speed. While other candidates tried to memorize which symbol did what, Josiah focused on understanding the underlying logic of the system. When his turn came, Josiah ignored the specific symbols and instead paid attention to their relationship to each other. He found that by touching combinations of symbols rather than individual ones, he could control the ship more effectively. His navigation was not smooth or elegant, but he managed to guide the spacecraft through the asteroid field without crashing. The Corvani observers were surprised. Most species either succeeded easily because they had natural telepathic abilities, or failed completely because they tried to use the technology like their own familiar equipment. Josiah had done something different. He had adapted to the alien system instead of trying to force it to work like human technology. Dr. Paul Richards was eliminated in the first round. His extensive knowledge of human spacecraft design actually worked against him because he kept trying to make the alien controls behave like the systems he understood. When that approach failed, he became frustrated and gave up. Rebecca Stone passed the first test, but just barely. Her military training had taught her to follow procedures and protocols, which worked well with human technology, but was less effective with alien systems that operated on completely different principles. The second test was even more challenging. Candidates had to repair a damaged piece of alien equipment using only basic tools and their understanding of how the technology worked. The equipment was a power generator that provided energy for life support systems on a space station. Most candidates approached this test by trying to identify the broken component and replace it. But the alien technology did not work that way. Instead of individual parts that could be swapped out, the entire system was integrated in ways that human engineering had never achieved. Josiah looked at the damaged generator for a long time before touching anything. He had learned from years of fixing broken cars that the best approach was to understand what the machine was supposed to do before trying to figure out why it was not doing it. The generator was supposed to convert raw energy into a stable power supply. Josiah could see that energy was flowing into the device, but it was not coming out in a usable form. Something was interrupting the conversion process. Instead of trying to fix the specific component that was broken, Josiah created a bypass system using spare parts that were scattered around the testing area. His solution was crude and inefficient by alien standards, but it worked. The generator began producing stable power again. The Corvani observers took notes on their strange devices. They had never seen a candidate solve this particular problem by building a workaround instead of making a proper repair. It was an approach that showed both creativity and persistence. By the end of the first week, over half of the human candidates had been eliminated. Those who remained were mostly people with military or scientific backgrounds who had managed to adapt their existing skills to the alien challenges. Josiah was one of only 200 humans who advanced to the second round of testing. He was surprised to discover that Rebecca Stone was also still in the competition. She had figured out how to use her military discipline to stay calm under pressure, even when dealing with technology she did not understand. The candidates who remained were moved to a different part of the facility where the tests became even more difficult. They were required to work in teams with people they had never met before, solving problems that required both technical skill and social cooperation. Josiah found himself working with candidates from different countries and backgrounds. Some of them spoke English poorly, and others had cultural differences that made communication challenging. But Josiah had learned from working in his small-town garage that people were fundamentally the same everywhere. They all wanted to succeed, and they all had something valuable to contribute. The team challenges showed the Corvani observers something they had not expected to see from humans. While most species either worked together naturally through telepathic connections or failed to cooperate at all, humans had developed unique ways of communicating and coordinating their efforts despite not sharing a natural mental link. As the second week of testing began, Josiah realized that he was no longer just competing for himself. He was representing something larger than his own dreams. He was showing the galaxy what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept limitations that others placed on them. The stars above the Nevada desert looked the same as they did from his garage in Montana, but everything else had changed. Josiah was no longer just a small-town mechanic dreaming of space travel. He was a human being proving that his species deserved to be taken seriously by the rest of the galaxy. The second round of testing moved beyond the Nevada facility to an orbital station that humans had never seen before. The Corvani had built the station specifically for the tournament, and it contained testing environments that could simulate conditions from dozens of different worlds throughout the galaxy. Josiah found himself on a shuttle with 30 other human candidates who had made it this far. Rebecca Stone sat across from him, looking calm despite the fact that they were about to leave Earth's atmosphere for the first time in their lives. She had noticed that Josiah never seemed worried or excited about anything, which was unusual for someone in such an extraordinary situation. "Are you nervous?" Rebecca asked him as the shuttle prepared for launch. Josiah looked out the small window at the Earth below. "No," he said simply. I have been waiting for this my whole life. The orbital station was massive beyond anything the human mind could easily comprehend. It contained testing chambers that could recreate the crushing gravity of gas giant moons, the toxic atmospheres of volcanic worlds, and the freezing vacuum of deep space. Candidates from hundreds of different species moved through the corridors, preparing for challenges that would determine their futures. Josiah was amazed to see his first real aliens. There were tall, elegant beings with silver skin who seemed to float rather than walk. There were small, furry creatures with multiple arms who chattered constantly in high-pitched voices. There were crystalline beings who looked like living gemstones and communicated through patterns of colored light. All of these species had natural abilities that humans lacked. Some could survive in environments that would kill humans instantly. Others could process information at speeds that made human thinking seem sluggish. Many had telepathic abilities that allowed them to communicate complex ideas without using words. But Josiah noticed something else about the alien candidates. Many of them seemed to rely entirely on their natural advantages. When faced with a problem that their species was not naturally equipped to handle, they often gave up quickly or became frustrated. The testing began with individual challenges that were designed to push each candidate beyond their comfort zone. Josiah was placed in a chamber that simulated the navigation system of a deep space exploration vessel. The controls were designed for a species with tentacles rather than fingers, and the information displays used colors that human eyes could barely distinguish. Most human candidates who faced this challenge spent their time trying to adapt the controls to work with human hands. They struggled to reach buttons that were positioned for much longer limbs and squinted at displays that were nearly invisible to human vision. Josiah took a different approach. Instead of trying to use the controls as they were designed, he looked for alternative ways to operate the system. He discovered that the navigation computer could be controlled through voice commands in the Corvani language, which he had been studying since the tournament was announced. His pronunciation was terrible, and his grammar was completely wrong, but the computer was able to understand his basic commands. By combining simple voice instructions with the few controls he could actually reach, Josiah managed to plot a course through a complex system of gravitational anomalies that had stumped candidates from much more advanced species. The Corvani observers were taking more detailed notes now. They had begun to realize that this particular human was not succeeding through luck or accident. He was consistently finding solutions that no other species had discovered, not because he was more intelligent or physically capable, but because he approached problems in ways that no one expected. Rebecca Stone was also advancing through the individual challenges, but she was struggling more than Josiah. Her military training had taught her to follow procedures and rely on equipment that worked in predictable ways. The alien technology required a level of improvisation that was difficult for someone who had been trained to minimize risk and follow established protocols. The group challenges in the second round were even more complex than those in Nevada. Candidates were mixed into teams that included members from different species, and they had to solve problems that required combining different types of abilities and knowledge. Josiah found himself on a team with a Zephyrian named Crix, a crystalline, being called harmonic resonance, and two other humans. The Zephyrian could manipulate gravity fields with his mind, which was useful for moving objects in zero-gravity environments. The crystalline being could process mathematical calculations instantly and had perfect memory for technical specifications. The challenge required the team to repair a damaged space station while it was under attack by automated defense systems. Each team member had to contribute their unique abilities while working together to complete the repairs before the station's life support systems failed completely. The other team members initially ignored Josiah's suggestions because humans were known to be the least capable species in the competition. Crix could handle the gravity-related repairs easily, and harmonic resonance could calculate the exact specifications needed for each component. They assumed that the humans were only included to meet some kind of diversity requirement. But as the challenge progressed, it became clear that technical abilities alone were not enough. The automated defense systems were designed to adapt to whatever approach the repair teams used. Every time Crix tried to manipulate the gravity around a damaged component, The defenses found a way to counteract his efforts. When harmonic resonance calculated the perfect repair sequence, the defenses changed the parameters to make that sequence impossible. Josiah realized that the challenge was not really about making repairs. It was about outthinking a system that was designed to anticipate and counter every logical approach. The solution required doing something that the automated defenses would not expect. "We need to make the repairs wrong," Josiah told his teammates. Crix looked at him with the confusion that came from translating concepts between very different types of minds. "Wrong repairs will not restore function to the station. Right repairs will not work either," Josiah explained. "The defense system expects us to fix everything properly. But if we make repairs that are just good enough to keep the station running, but not good enough to be considered complete, the system might not recognize what we are doing." It was a crazy idea that went against every logical approach to problem solving. But the team was running out of time and conventional methods were not working. Harmonic resonance calculated that Josiah's approach had only a 12% chance of success, but that was better than the 0% chance they faced with any other strategy. Working together, the team made deliberately imperfect repairs that barely met the minimum requirements to keep the station operational. The automated defenses continued to attack them, but the attacks were less effective because the system could not predict which repairs were intentional and which were mistakes. The strategy worked. The station's life support came back online just as the time limit expired, and the team had successfully completed the challenge using an approach that none of them would have considered on their own. Crix was amazed by Josiah's unconventional thinking. In his species culture, there was always a correct way to solve any problem, and finding that correct way was simply a matter of having enough knowledge and natural ability. The idea of deliberately doing something wrong in order to achieve the right result was completely foreign to his way of thinking. "How did you know that approach would work?" Crix asked Josiah after the challenge was completed. Josiah struggled to explain something that was more intuition than knowledge. "Sometimes when I am fixing a car, the proper repair does not work because there is something else wrong that I cannot see. So I try something that should not work, and that helps me understand what the real problem is." This answer did not make sense to Crix from a logical standpoint, but he was beginning to understand that humans might have ways of thinking that were valuable precisely because they were not logical. As the second round of testing continued, more alien candidates began to pay attention to the humans who were still competing. Josiah in particular was gaining a reputation for finding solutions that were completely unexpected, but surprisingly effective. The Corvani observers had stopped being surprised by human failures and started being intrigued by human successes. They were beginning to wonder if the Galactic Federation had been wrong to classify humans as a minor species. Perhaps these beings had abilities that were not obvious, but were nevertheless significant. When the results of the second round were announced, only 50 candidates from all species remained in the competition. 3 of them were human, including Josiah and Rebecca. They would advance to the final testing phase, which would take place in deep space aboard an actual Corvani exploration vessel. Josiah felt no satisfaction at making it this far. He had not entered the competition to prove that he was better than other people. He had entered to prove that humans deserved a chance to explore the galaxy. And that proof would only come if he could succeed in the final challenge, which would be the most difficult test of all. The final testing phase took place aboard the Corvani exploration vessel called the Starseeker. The ship was larger than any human-built spacecraft and contained technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics in ways that human science could not explain. 50 candidates from 27 different species were brought aboard for the ultimate test of their abilities. Josiah was amazed by the other candidates who had made it this far. There was a Vortani named Skyweaver, who had natural wings and could fly through zero-gravity environments with perfect grace. There was a Christek being called Logic Prime, whose crystalline brain could process thousands of calculations simultaneously. There were Zephyrians who could manipulate gravity, thermals who could survive in temperatures that would vaporize most materials, and dozens of other beings with abilities that seemed like magic to human understanding. But Josiah was no longer intimidated by superior abilities. He had learned during the previous rounds that natural advantages could sometimes become disadvantages when they prevented individuals from thinking creatively about problems. The candidates with the most impressive abilities often struggled, the most when those abilities were not enough to solve a particular challenge. Crix had also advanced to the final round, and he sought out Josiah as soon as they were aboard the Starseeker. The young Zephyrian had been thinking about their previous collaboration and wanted to understand more about human problem-solving methods. "Your species approaches difficulties in ways that mine never considers," Crix told Josiah as they explored the ship together. "Our education teaches us that every problem has an optimal solution that can be discovered through proper analysis. But you find solutions that work despite not being optimal." Josiah nodded. He had been thinking about the same thing since the competition began. "Maybe that is because humans have to solve problems with tools that are not designed for the job. We learn to make things work even when they should not work." The ship's corridors were filled with candidates from different species who were studying each other and trying to understand their competition. Many of them had natural abilities that made them seem like gods compared to the 3 remaining humans. But Josiah noticed that they were also limited by their expectations of how things should work. Rebecca Stone was struggling more than Josiah with the pressure of being among such advanced beings. Her military training had prepared her for human conflict, but it had not prepared her for cooperation with species that thought in completely different ways. She was beginning to doubt whether humans really belonged at this level of competition. "Look around you," Rebecca said to Josiah, as they watched a group of thermal beings practice manipulating superheated plasma with their bare hands. "These creatures can do things that humans will never be able to do. What makes you think we have any chance of competing with them?" Josiah watched the thermal demonstration for a moment before answering. "They can do things we cannot do, but we can do things they cannot do too. The question is whether the final test will require abilities that only humans have." The final challenge was announced by Commander Vex, the highest-ranking Corvani officer aboard the Starseeker. The 50 remaining candidates were brought to the ship's main conference room, where a holographic display showed a star system with multiple planets and moons. "Your final test will be a real exploration mission," Commander Vex announced. "This star system contains several worlds that have never been surveyed by any species. You will work together to gather scientific data, map resources, and assess the potential for future colonization. The mission will last for 30 days, and you will face actual dangers including hostile environment conditions, equipment failures, and possible encounters with unknown life forms." The candidates were divided into 5 teams of 10 members, each. Josiah found himself on a team that included Crix, Rebecca, Skyweaver the Vortani, Logic Prime the Christek, and 5 other beings from different species. Each team would be assigned to survey a different planet in the system. Josiah's team was assigned to a world designated as Planet 3, which had an oxygen-rich atmosphere, but was covered by dense forests that blocked most sensor readings from orbit. The planet appeared to be habitable for most species, but initial scans had detected some unusual energy readings that could not be explained. The team descended to the planet's surface in a small exploration craft that was equipped with the latest Corvani technology. The ship's sensors could analyze atmospheric composition, detect life forms from great distances, and map underground structures through solid rock. But when they entered the planet's atmosphere, most of the advanced sensors stopped working properly. The energy readings we detected from orbit appear to be interfering with our equipment, Logic Prime reported after running diagnostics on the ship's systems. "I calculate an 87% probability that we will need to rely on manual observations and basic instruments." This development worried most of the team members. Their species had become dependent on advanced technology for exploration and scientific research. Without sophisticated sensors and computer analysis, they would have to gather information using methods that seemed primitive and unreliable. But Josiah was not worried about the sensor failures. He had grown up in a small town where equipment broke down regularly, and people had to find ways to get things done with whatever tools were available. His experience as a mechanic had taught him that there was always more than one way to solve a problem. The team landed near a clearing in the dense forest and began setting up a base camp. Their mission was to survey the planet's resources, catalog, its life forms and assess its suitability for colonization. With their advanced sensors offline, this seemed like an almost impossible task. Skyweaver tried to use her natural flying ability to scout the area from above, but the planet's thick canopy blocked her view of the ground. Logic Prime attempted to compensate for the sensor failures by increasing the sensitivity of the remaining instruments, but this only resulted in more interference and confusion. Josiah suggested a different approach. Instead of relying on technology to gather information from a distance, the team could explore the planet directly and make observations using their natural senses. It was a slow and potentially dangerous method, but it was also the most reliable way to get accurate information about their environment. Direct observation is inefficient and risky, Logic Prime objected. Proper exploration requires systematic data collection using calibrated instruments. Proper exploration requires getting accurate information, Josiah replied. If the instruments are not working, then we need to use a different method. Crick supported Josiah's suggestion because he had learned to trust human problem-solving during their previous collaboration. Rebecca was less enthusiastic, but she recognized that conventional military reconnaissance methods might be applicable to this situation. The team spent the next several days exploring the forest on foot and documenting what they found through direct observation. It was hard work that required them to move slowly and carefully through difficult terrain, but they gradually began to understand the planet in ways that sensor readings could never have revealed. Josiah discovered that the energy interference was being caused by a type of crystalline plant that grew throughout the forest. The plants absorbed electromagnetic radiation and converted it into a form of energy that helped them grow in the dim light beneath the forest canopy. This discovery explained why the advanced sensors were not working, and also revealed a potential new source of renewable energy. Skyweaver found that she could navigate through the forest canopy by using landmarks and natural navigation techniques rather than relying on electronic guidance systems. Her species had originally evolved as natural flyers, and returning to those instincts allowed her to scout areas that would have been impossible to reach with disabled equipment. Rebecca used her military training to establish security protocols and coordinate the team's movements through potentially dangerous terrain. Her experience with human small unit tactics proved surprisingly effective for managing a mixed-species exploration team. Even Logic Prime began to adapt to the situation by using his computational abilities to process and organize the information that team members gathered through direct observation. Instead of analyzing sensor data, he focused on finding patterns and connections in the field reports that the team provided. As the mission progressed, Josiah's team made discoveries that none of the other teams had achieved. They identified several new species of plants and animals, mapped underground water sources, and located mineral deposits that could support future colonization efforts. Their success was due not to superior technology or natural abilities, but to their willingness to adapt their methods when their preferred approaches did not work. Commander Vex monitored the progress of all 5 teams from orbit, and he was surprised by the results coming from Planet 3. The team that included the human candidates was producing more useful data than teams with much more advanced natural abilities and better equipment. The other teams were struggling because they had become dependent on technology and natural advantages that were not available in their assigned environments. The second week on Planet 3 brought unexpected dangers that tested the team's ability to work together under extreme pressure. The crystalline plants that had been interfering with their sensors began exhibiting strange behavior patterns. During certain times of day, the plants would emit powerful energy pulses that could disrupt not only electronic equipment, but also the biological functions of some alien species. Logic Prime was the first team member to be seriously affected. As a crystalline being himself, he was particularly sensitive to the electromagnetic fluctuations produced by the planet's plant life. During one of the energy pulses, his consciousness became temporarily scattered, and he lost the ability to process information coherently. "My cognitive matrices are experiencing cascade failures," Logic Prime reported in a voice that sounded confused and uncertain. "I cannot maintain logical thought processes during the energy emission periods." This was a serious problem for the team, Logic Prime had been serving as their primary data analyst, organizing all the information they collected into coherent reports. Without his computational abilities, they would have to find new ways to manage the large amounts of data they were gathering about the planet. Skyweaver was also having difficulties. The energy pulses interfered with her natural navigation abilities, causing her to become disoriented when flying through the forest canopy. During one particularly strong pulse, she crashed into a tree and injured her wing badly enough that she could not fly for several days. The team's thermal member, a being called Heatwave, found that the energy fluctuations caused his internal temperature regulation to malfunction. Instead of maintaining the high body temperature that his species required for normal function, he began experiencing dangerous temperature swings that left him weak and confused. Within a few days, half the team was unable to perform their normal functions. The alien species that had seemed so advanced and capable were now helpless because their natural abilities had become liabilities in this particular environment. But the 3 human members of the team were not affected by the energy pulses. Human biology was apparently too simple and primitive to be disrupted by the electromagnetic fluctuations that were causing problems for more advanced species. For the first time since the competition began, Josiah found himself in a situation where being human was actually an advantage. Rebecca and the other human team member, a scientist named Carl Morris, were also unaffected by the planet's strange energy emissions. "It looks like we are the only ones who can function normally while these pulses are happening," Rebecca observed as she watched their alien teammates struggle with the latest energy emission. Josiah realized that this was an opportunity to prove that humans could contribute something valuable to galactic exploration. The advanced alien species were more capable than humans in most situations, but they were also more vulnerable to certain types of environmental hazards. "We need to take over the mission," Josiah told Rebecca and Carl. "Our teammates cannot do their jobs right now, so we have to do those jobs for them." This was not an easy decision. None of the humans had the natural abilities or technical knowledge that their alien teammates possessed. They would have to find ways to accomplish the same tasks using different methods and inferior capabilities. Carl Morris was a geologist who had studied alien mineral formations in preparation for the competition. He took over Logic Prime's data analysis responsibilities by using manual calculation methods and basic statistical techniques. His work was slower and less precise than what Logic Prime could accomplish, but it was accurate enough to be useful. Rebecca used her military training to coordinate the team's activities and maintain security during the periods when their alien teammates were incapacitated. She established communication schedules, organized supply distribution, and planned safe routes for exploration activities. Josiah focused on keeping the team's equipment functioning despite the ongoing electromagnetic interference. His experience as a mechanic proved valuable when dealing with technology that was behaving unpredictably. He found ways to shield sensitive instruments during energy pulses and developed backup procedures for when primary systems failed. The most difficult challenge came during the 3rd week when the team encountered their first signs of intelligent life on the planet. They discovered structures that appeared to be artificial, suggesting that Planet 3 was inhabited by a species that had not been detected during the initial orbital surveys. Making contact with an unknown alien species was far beyond anything the human team members had been trained for. This type of situation normally required specialists with extensive experience in xenobiology, linguistics, and diplomatic protocols. But their alien teammates were still suffering from the effects of the energy pulses and could not provide the expertise that the situation demanded. "We cannot make first contact without proper protocols," Carl argued when they discovered the alien structures. "This requires specialists who understand how to communicate with unknown species safely." But Josiah disagreed. They were explorers on a mission to survey the planet, and part of that mission involved cataloging any intelligent life they encountered. They could not simply ignore the discovery because they lacked the ideal qualifications to handle it properly. "We are not making formal diplomatic contact," Josiah pointed out. "We are just gathering information about what we found. That is something we can do without being specialists." The alien structures appeared to be some kind of research facility built around one of the large crystalline plants. The beings who had constructed it were apparently studying the same electromagnetic phenomena that were causing problems for the exploration team. Josiah suggested that they observe the site from a distance and try to learn about its inhabitants without making direct contact. This approach would allow them to gather useful information while minimizing the risk of causing problems through inexperienced communication attempts. The team spent several days watching the research facility through concealed observation posts. They saw beings that looked similar to humans but with some obvious biological differences. These creatures seemed to be immune to the energy pulses, just like the human team members. They must have evolved here, Rebecca observed. That would explain why they are not affected by the electromagnetic emissions. The alien researchers were clearly intelligent and technologically sophisticated. They had built complex instruments that could measure and analyze the energy patterns produced by the crystalline plants. But their technology was based on principles that were completely different from anything used by the galactic community. This discovery was potentially significant for several reasons. It suggested that the planet was already inhabited, which would affect any future colonization plans. It also indicated that there might be alternative approaches to technology development that could be valuable to the galactic community. But the most important discovery was that the planet's indigenous species had found ways to work with the electromagnetic phenomena rather than being hindered by it. They had adapted their technology and their society to take advantage of the unique conditions on their world. Josiah realized that this was exactly what his team had been doing during their mission. When their advanced technology and natural abilities became liabilities, they had adapted their methods to work with the planet's conditions rather than fighting against them. The indigenous species had made the same type of adaptation on a much larger scale. They had built their entire civilization around working with the planet's electromagnetic characteristics, rather than trying to overcome them. This observation gave Josiah an idea about how to help his alien teammates recover from their ongoing difficulties with the energy pulses. Instead of trying to shield them from the electromagnetic emissions, they could try to help them adapt to working with those emissions. Working with the indigenous research data that they had observed, Josiah developed techniques that allowed Logic Prime to synchronize his cognitive processes with the planet's energy cycles. Instead of being disrupted by the pulses, Logic Prime learned to time his analytical work to occur during the quiet periods between emissions. Similar adaptation techniques helped Skyweaver and Heatwave regain most of their normal functions. They could not operate exactly as they would in normal environments, but they could contribute effectively to the team's mission by adjusting their methods to account for the planet's unique conditions. By the end of the third week, the team was functioning better than ever. The alien members had learned to work around their environmental limitations, while the human members had gained confidence in their ability to handle situations that were beyond their formal training. Commander Vex monitored their progress with growing interest. The team exploring Planet 3 was not only producing the most useful scientific data, but they were also demonstrating problem-solving abilities that none of the other teams had shown. Most importantly, they had discovered an intelligent species and found ways to study them without causing conflicts or misunderstandings. This was exactly the type of careful, adaptive exploration that the Corvani Empire valued most in their deep space missions. The final week of the exploration mission brought the ultimate test of everything the candidates had learned during their time on Planet 3. Commander Vex announced that all 5 teams would be brought together for a joint operation that would determine which candidates would be selected for the Corvani Exploration Corps. The task was to establish a permanent research station on Planet 3 that could continue studying the indigenous species and the unique electromagnetic phenomena. The station would need to function despite the energy pulses that had caused so many problems during the mission, and it would need to be designed in a way that would not interfere with the native civilization. All 50 remaining candidates were transported to the planet's surface and given access to advanced construction equipment and building materials. They had 1 week to design and build a research station that could meet the mission requirements. The challenge was more complex than any previous test because it required candidates to work together across species lines while dealing with real, environmental hazards and cultural considerations. Success would depend not just on individual abilities, but on the capacity to coordinate different types of expertise toward a common goal. Josiah found himself working with candidates from all 5 exploration teams, including some beings whose natural abilities were far superior to anything humans could achieve. There were Crystech engineers who could calculate structural requirements instantly, thermal technicians who could work with materials at temperatures that would be lethal to most species, and Vortani architects who could design in 3 dimensions, with perfect spatial awareness. But the advanced candidates were struggling with the same problems that had affected Josiah's team throughout the mission. Their sophisticated abilities and high-tech equipment were being disrupted by the planet's electromagnetic environment. The more advanced a candidate's natural abilities, the more difficult it became for them to function normally during energy pulse periods. Most of the candidates tried to solve this problem by building shielding systems that would protect the research station from electromagnetic interference. They designed elaborate force fields and isolation barriers that would create a normal technological environment inside the facility. These approaches worked during the quiet periods between energy pulses, but they failed completely when the planet's crystalline plants emitted their strongest electromagnetic bursts. The shielding systems either overloaded and shut down, or they created feedback loops that made the interference even worse. Josiah watched these attempts fail repeatedly before suggesting a different approach. Instead of trying to protect the research station from the electromagnetic environment, they could design it to work with that environment. What if we built the station like the indigenous species build their facilities? Josiah proposed during one of the planning sessions. They do not try to block the energy pulses, they use them. This suggestion was met with skepticism from most of the other candidates. Using the electromagnetic pulses would require abandoning many of the standard technologies that galactic civilization depended on. It would mean building a research station that operated on completely different principles from anything the Corvani had constructed before. But Crix supported Josiah's idea because he had learned to trust human problem-solving methods. Logic Prime also agreed after calculating that conventional approaches had only a 15% probability of long-term success in the planet's electromagnetic environment. Rebecca and Carl joined the discussion, along with several other candidates, who had observed the indigenous research facility during their exploration missions. Together they began developing plans for a research station that would be powered by the planet's energy pulses rather than hindered by them. The design they created was unlike anything in galactic architecture. Instead of trying to maintain a stable technological environment, the station would operate in cycles that matched the planet's electromagnetic patterns. During energy pulse periods, the facility would use the electromagnetic energy to power high-energy research activities. During quiet periods, it would switch to low-power systems for data analysis and communication. Building this type of facility required techniques that none of the candidates had learned in their formal training. They had to experiment with materials and construction methods that would respond to electromagnetic energy in useful ways rather than being damaged by it. Skyweaver discovered that certain metallic alloys became more flexible during energy pulses, allowing them to be shaped into complex configurations that would be impossible to achieve with normal construction techniques. Heatwave found that some ceramic materials could store electromagnetic energy and release it gradually during quiet periods. The human candidates contributed by finding ways to adapt standard construction tools and techniques to work in the planet's unusual environment. Josiah used his mechanical experience to modify equipment so that it could function, despite ongoing electromagnetic interference. As the construction project progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Candidates who had been struggling with the planet's environment throughout the mission began to adapt and find ways to contribute effectively to the project. Species that had seemed completely incompatible with the electromagnetic conditions learned to time their activities to take advantage of the energy cycles. Beings whose natural abilities had been liabilities became assets when they found ways to synchronize their capabilities with the planet's unique characteristics. The research station that emerged from this collaborative effort was a hybrid of advanced galactic technology and indigenous planetary techniques. It looked nothing like a standard Corvani facility, but it was perfectly suited to its environment and purpose. The station could conduct sophisticated scientific research during both energy pulse and quiet periods. It could communicate with orbiting spacecraft without interference, and it could maintain life support systems for multiple species despite the electromagnetic fluctuations. Most importantly, It was designed to operate without disrupting the indigenous civilization or the planet's natural electromagnetic balance. When Commander Vex toured the completed facility, he was amazed by what the candidates had accomplished. The research station represented a completely new approach to exploration infrastructure that could be valuable throughout the galaxy. This facility demonstrates capabilities that none of our existing designs possess. Commander Vex told the assembled candidates, "You have created something that adapts to its environment rather than trying to impose standard conditions on an unusual world." But the most significant achievement was not the research station itself. It was the way that 50 candidates from 27 different species had learned to work together effectively, despite their vast differences in abilities, backgrounds, and natural characteristics. The candidates had discovered that their individual limitations could become group strengths when they found ways to complement each other's capabilities. Species that seemed weak in some areas proved to be essential in others, and beings with overwhelming natural advantages learned that those advantages were not always sufficient for complex challenges. Josiah had played a central role in this process, but not because he was the most capable candidate. His contribution was his willingness to try approaches that seemed impossible or impractical to more advanced species. His human perspective had helped the group find solutions that none of them could have discovered individually. The construction project had demonstrated exactly the type of collaborative problem-solving that the Corvani Empire valued most in their exploration missions. Deep space exploration required crews that could adapt to unknown conditions and work together, despite fundamental differences in biology, psychology, and cultural background. As the final evaluation began, Josiah realized that he had already achieved something more important than winning the competition. He had proven that humans could contribute meaningfully to galactic exploration, not despite their limitations, but because of their unique approaches to solving impossible problems. The research station they had built together stood as evidence that no species was too primitive or too advanced to learn from the others. The galaxy was large enough to need every type of intelligence and capability that evolution had produced, including the stubborn determination of a mechanic from Montana, who had never learned when to quit on his dreams. The selection ceremony took place aboard the Starseeker in the ship's main assembly hall. All 50 candidates who had participated in the final mission gathered to hear Commander Vex announce which 5 individuals would be chosen for the Corvani Exploration Corps. Josiah stood with the other candidates, feeling calm despite the magnitude of the moment. He had given everything he had to the competition, and he was proud of what he had accomplished regardless of the final results. The research station they had built together represented something new in galactic exploration, and he had played an important role in making it possible. The other human candidates were more nervous. Rebecca Stone stood at attention in her military posture, but Josiah could see the tension in her shoulders. Carl Morris kept adjusting his glasses and checking his notes, as if reviewing technical specifications could somehow influence the decision that had already been made. Commander Vex stepped forward to address the assembled candidates. His blue skin seemed to glow under the bright lights of the assembly hall, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had led exploration missions to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The Corvani Exploration Corps has existed for over 3,000 years, Commander Vex began. In that time, we have explored millions of star systems and made contact with hundreds of intelligent species. Our success has always depended on selecting individuals who possess not just exceptional abilities but exceptional character. The commander paused and looked across the group of candidates. This tournament has shown us something we did not expect to discover. We have learned that the galaxy contains forms of intelligence and capability that we had not properly recognized or valued. Josiah noticed that several of the advanced alien candidates were shifting uncomfortably. Many of them had assumed that their natural advantages would guarantee their selection for the Exploration Corps. The competition had proven that superior abilities alone were not sufficient for the challenges that real exploration missions presented. The final mission demonstrated that successful exploration requires more than advanced technology or exceptional natural capabilities. Commander Vex continued. It requires adaptability, creativity, persistence, and the ability to work effectively with beings who think in completely different ways. The commander activated a holographic display that showed images from the final construction project. The research station they had built appeared in three-dimensional detail, along with data showing how it had successfully adapted to Planet 3's unique electromagnetic environment. This facility represents a breakthrough in exploration infrastructure design, Commander Vex explained. But more importantly, it demonstrates the type of collaborative problem-solving that defines the best exploration missions. Every species contributed something essential to this project, including species that we had previously considered too primitive for advanced exploration work. Josiah felt a surge of pride, not for himself but for humanity as a whole. The commander was acknowledging that humans had something valuable to contribute to galactic exploration. It was exactly what Josiah had hoped to prove when he first heard about the tournament. The 5 candidates selected for the Corvani Exploration Corps represent different types of excellence, Commander Vex announced. Each brings unique capabilities that will strengthen our mission to explore the unknown regions of the galaxy. The first name called was Crix, the young Zephyrian who had learned to work effectively with human problem-solving methods. Crix stepped forward with the gravity-defying grace characteristic of his species, but his expression showed genuine surprise at being selected. The second selection was Harmonic Resonance, the crystalline being whose computational abilities had proven essential for organizing complex multi-species collaboration efforts. Logic Prime had actually been more advanced technically, but Harmonic Resonance had shown better adaptability when circumstances required unconventional approaches. The third candidate chosen was Skyweaver, the Vortani, whose natural flying abilities had been enhanced by her willingness to learn navigation techniques from other species. She had demonstrated that even beings with exceptional natural talents could benefit from learning different ways of thinking about problems. Rebecca Stone was selected as the 4th member of the new Exploration Corps. Her military training had proven valuable not because of its specific techniques, but because of the discipline and leadership qualities that allowed her to coordinate diverse teams under difficult conditions. When Commander Vex called Rebecca's name, she stepped forward, with obvious relief and pride. She had struggled more than Josiah during the competition, but her persistence and willingness to adapt had ultimately earned her a place among the galaxy's elite explorers. The 5th and final selection was the moment that would determine whether Josiah's dreams would become reality or remain forever out of reach. Commander Vex looked directly at him before speaking the last name. Josiah Carter of Earth. The words seemed to echo in the assembly hall longer than physics should have allowed. Josiah felt a strange mixture of triumph and disbelief. He had achieved something that most humans would have considered impossible, but it felt like a natural continuation of the path he had been following his entire life. As Josiah stepped forward to join the other selected candidates, he could see the amazement and confusion on the faces of many alien candidates who had not been chosen. Beings with far superior natural abilities were trying to understand how a primitive human had succeeded, where they had failed. But Crix understood, and so did several other candidates who had worked closely with Josiah during the final mission. They had learned that intelligence and capability could take many different forms, and that sometimes the most valuable qualities were the ones that seemed least impressive at first glance. Commander Vex addressed the 5 new members of the Exploration Corps directly. You will begin your service with a mission to establish permanent research facilities in the star system you have just surveyed. This will be a long-term assignment that will test everything you have learned during this competition. The commander's expression became more serious. But your selection represents something larger than your individual achievements. You are proof that the galaxy contains untapped potential in species and individuals that we have overlooked. Your success will change how the Galactic Federation evaluates the capabilities of emerging civilizations. After the ceremony, Josiah found himself surrounded by candidates who wanted to understand how he had succeeded. Some were genuinely curious about human problem-solving methods. Others seemed to be looking for excuses to explain their own failures. But the conversation that mattered most to Josiah was with Crix, who had become both a friend and a teacher during their time together. Your species will be reclassified, Crix told Josiah as they prepared to leave the Starseeker. The Galactic Federation cannot continue to call humans a minor species after what you have accomplished here." Josiah nodded, but his thoughts were already moving beyond personal achievement. "I hope other humans will have chances to prove themselves too. I do not want to be the only one." 6 months later, Josiah stood on the observation deck of the permanent research station that his team had established in orbit around Planet 3. The facility was operating perfectly, conducting research that was advancing galactic understanding of electromagnetic phenomena and indigenous civilization development. Earth had indeed been reclassified by the Galactic Federation. Humans were now considered a promising emergent species with full rights to participate in galactic exploration and research programs. The Carter Institute for Human Space Exploration had been established with Josiah as its director, providing training and opportunities for other humans who dreamed of reaching for the stars. Lisa Grant had been selected as the Institute's chief technical officer. She had traveled from Montana to help design training programs that would prepare future human candidates for careers in space exploration. Frank Morrison served as a flight instructor, teaching the aerial combat techniques that had proven surprisingly useful for zero-gravity maneuvering. Even Katie had found a role in the new program. Her banking experience made her valuable for managing the complex financial and logistical challenges of organizing interstellar education programs. But the most important result of Josiah's success was not the recognition or opportunities it created for other humans. It was the proof that the galaxy was large enough and diverse enough to need every type of intelligence and capability that evolution had produced. Standing on the observation deck and looking out at the stars, Josiah thought about the small town in Montana where his journey had begun. Those same stars were shining down on his hometown right now, inspiring other dreamers who might not yet know what they were dreaming about. Somewhere among those points of light were worlds that had never been explored, civilizations that had never been contacted, and discoveries that would change how every species understood the universe. There was enough wonder out there to keep explorers busy for millions of years. Josiah had achieved his dream of becoming a space explorer. But, more importantly, he had opened a path for others to follow their own impossible dreams.